Well, good evening. It's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's council meeting on Monday, the 15th of April 2024, and to welcome those people who are in the public gallery this evening. It's always nice to see people here with us in person. Being 5:30 p.m, I now officially declare this meeting open. I wish to advise that council meetings are recorded and made publicly available on our website, and council meetings are also live streamed on YouTube, and in accordance with council's policy, I will ask the CEO to confirm that the audio recording has started. Thank you. I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, pay respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge today's Tasmanian Aboriginal community. Our attendees this evening are myself, Councillor Reid, Deputy Mayor Councillor Gladright, Councillor Antoli, Councillor Bain, Councillor Dean, Councillor Fox, Councillor Midgley, Councillor Richardson, Councillor Street, Councillor Cordova. Councillor Dean, I think, must be stuck in some traffic. I haven't heard from him, so hopefully he's not too far away. We also have with us this evening from our staff a very warm welcome to our new Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Dave Stewart, who has joined us today on his very first day, and he gets a council meeting on his first day. Yeah, that was his response too. We still have with us Mr. Arnold for this week as they do a handover, and he's been demoted to Executive Manager for this week, but we're still pleased to have you here. We also have with us the Director of Governance, Recreation and Property Services, Mr. Spee, the Director of People and Finance, Mr. Spinks, Director of Engineering Services, Mr. Reeve, Director of Environment, Development and Community, Ms. Shakuti, our Media and Communications Advisor, Ms. Adams, Manager Development Services, Ms. Tyler Moore, and Acting Executive Assistant, Ms. Lewis, and welcome to Councillor Dean. We thought you might have been stuck in traffic. We are on page 1, confirmation of minutes. I'm looking for a mover and a seconder that the minutes of the open session of council meeting number 6, held on the 3rd of April 2024, be confirmed as a true record. Got a mover in Councillor Fox and a seconder in Councillor Gladright. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Workshops held since the last council meeting. There were no workshops. Declarations of interest. Does any councillor have a declaration of interest? No, thank you. A transfer of agenda items. Is there any item on the agenda that a councillor would like to move from closed into open session or open into closed session? Thank you. Questions without notice from the public. Does any member of the public with us here this evening wish to ask a question? If so, if you could come to the lectern and state your name and the suburb in which you live. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So my name is Valeska Winter, and I guess I give my address, is that right?
Just the suburb.
Blackmans Bay.
Thank you.
Just a very quick intro. I'm largely in support of the recent proposal of the Arms End Recycled Water Treatment Plant and the pipeline, but I do have some concerns related to the location, design and approval, which my questions are around. In relation to DA 2023-174 and the planning officer's report that identified residents did have valid concerns about the visual impact, I wondered, did all councillors actively refer to the full set of photo montages and or visit the proposed development site prior to making their vote, in order to fully understand the relevant concerns raised by residents?
Thank you. Look, obviously I can't speak for every single councillor, but we have access to all that information that's provided as part of the representations that are provided. We are given access to every representation from a development application through Dropbox, and it is also, if councillors wish to, then of their own volition they can visit a site. It is, I'd say, probably unusual for councillors to visit development application sites unless there's something in particular that they've read that they wish to clarify, but that's generally something that everyone would do on their own time, not as a collective given the different time requirements and commitments that people have.
Thank you. In relation to the same development number, following Council's approval of this industrial development in the environmental living zone, could you clarify how the approved development complements and enhances the use of the land for recreational purposes?
Ms Tyler Moore?
Through you, Mayor, responses to the requirements of the planning scheme were included in the officer's report that was on last fortnight's agenda, so the responses are contained within that.
So I guess I'm asking for clarity, because I felt after reading through the 100 pages that answer hasn't quite become clear to me.
Ms Tyler Moore?
Through you, Mayor, we're happy to have a discussion, or we can write. We're happy to meet with the residents if they want to discuss particular elements of the decision, particularly if you believe that it's going to form your decision whether to appeal the decision or not.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Could the proposed location of the recycled water treatment plant actually be further excavated to further reduce the visual impact of the industrial development?
Ms Tyler Moore?
Through you, Mayor, the decision was made on the plans that were presented to us. It's not Council's responsibility to find the alternatives. Certainly we can have discussions with the applicants during the process if there's elements that we think could be addressed through design detail, but I couldn't answer whether it was appropriate or not to relocate it and whether that be fit for purpose of how it actually functions, because it's obviously a functional equipment.
Yep. And just to clarify, that wasn't around like relocating it, but just if when we're thinking about appealing and if we might want to go down that path, I was just curious, yeah, could there be scope to do that if at that site, or is that a blanket no?
Ms Tyler Moore?
Through you, Mayor, what would occur for those who aren't familiar with an appeal process? The first step is a preliminary conference to just work out the nuts and bolts of how the hearings will occur. The second part that's available to people, which we always participate in as the permit authority, is mediation. So it's during that mediation process, all parties are involved, including the applicant and residents. In this example, residents may ask, can you put it a little bit over here or a little bit over there, or can you make it a little bit taller or shorter? So that all could form part of that mediation. And matters can be resolved through mediation in that everyone agrees, and there's a consent agreement which we prepare, and the tribunal would then need to sign that off to make sure that's compliant. So that is a possibility. If there was no agreement and a particular party was vehemently opposed to that or found that to be the main issue and a ground of appeal, then you would go to full hearing regarding that matter. With respect to if the parties want to appeal, we are able to discuss that with residents. Even if you're appealing against our decisions, we still offer the service of explaining to residents how it works, what you need to prepare, what it will be like in the hearing, because it can be quite daunting for a lot of people. So we do that. That's commonplace for us to do that with people. As I said, even if it's against our decision, we'll still offer that and explain how you present and how you go about it, and those sorts of questions you're asking. And we can give you a bit of guidance if something's way off chart. You could still bring it up, but we'd probably give you a bit of an idea about how best to go about that.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Could I just clarify further on that? Do you mean that would be something that we do after we've already made the appeal and then we could do that service, or is that something we could do before we make that decision?
Ms Tyler Moore?
Through you, Mayor, we can certainly do it before you make the decision to appeal, because you need to be mindful of your commitment to the appeal. You do have a fee you need to pay, not to us, to the tribunal. So we're happy to do that, but I do remind you that there are time limitations around when you can appeal.
Thank you.
So if you contact our team, we can organise that.
Thank you. In relation to the same DA number, I wondered, how is the amount payable for the removal of trees that are classed as high conservation value? How is that fee determined, and why does the amount vary between different DAs? For example, we were required to pay $250 for the removal, $500 for the removal of a white gum, and this development is required to only pay $250.
Ms Tyler Moore?
Through you, Mayor, the amounts are determined under the offset policy, which is an endorsed policy by Council and is available on our website, and it defines it for different types of trees and the number of trees and how it's applied.
Okay. In relation to Taswater as the owner of the land where the recycled water treatment plant development has been approved for, in 2016, as part of Taswater's upgrade at the site, the layout of that plant was specifically designed to limit the visual intrusion and keep the project as far from residential properties as possible. And that was done in consultation with residents in the community. I wondered, why is this intentional planning decision at that time, able to be disregarded and overridden in this, given it's the same parcel of land?
Ms Tullamore.
Through you, Mayor, I'm not aware of the 2016 discussion or how that worked. I suspect it was probably a discussion between Taswater and residents, may have been some consultation that may or may not have come through Council. I wasn't here at the time, so I'm not sure.
Yep.
And unless it was tied to the land by way of a planning permit or building permit or a Part 5 agreement or something to that effect, there's no obligation for them to have to, well, no obligation under the legislation we look at, such as land use planning and building, that they have to abide by that. That's up to them and their business operations about commitments to the public and how they do consultation. So
thank you.
Can't assist.
So that formed part of the DP EMP that they submitted. In retrospect, is it possible for me to view a copy of the development application that was approved at that time, so I could clarify?
Ms Tullamore.
Through you, Mayor, yes, we are able to make the plans available for viewing, but not copy.
Yep, thanks. When Taswater acquired the land at 112 Tinderbox Road in 2016, they agreed through the same DP EMP document to ensure ongoing recreational access as it currently occurred. Could you please advise specifically what recreational use is and is not permitted on this land and whereabouts on that land it can occur?
Ms Tullamore.
Through you, Mayor, the access and recreational land is not something that my area looks at. We would need to consider any lease agreements we have on the foreshore around that area and the land ownership that occurs around that, which, is not my area, but I'm sure we could take that on notice and provide the answer.
Thank you. Getting through them, thank you. In relation to that same question, I wondered, why does the seal plan of 112 Tinderbox Road not reflect the exact route of Suncoast Headlands walking trail that was represented to the community in the DPEMP for the Blackmans Bay sewage treatment plant? And just to make note, that was on page 36. It was a public access map that Taswater produced, and it clearly highlights the reroute of the walking trail was confirmed that it was going to go directly through the location of this new development.
Ms Tullamore.
Through you, Mayor, if a walking track may not be, it's possible that they're not kept on seal plans. It depends if the seal plan was amended. We'd need to look at the detail of the plan and the leases and licences around that and any rerouting which would involve our other departments as well. So I could take that on notice.
Thank you. And then following on from that, when disposing of that land to Taswater, I wondered, how did Kingborough Council ensure that it would actually have the right to construct or route the track in the agreed and consulted location? I'm just curious, what processes actually take place to go from what was approved to actually doing?
Mr Smee should be able to help us with that one.
Through you, Mayor, it formed part of the contract of sale.
Following on from that, what consultation or consideration might have been given, if there was any, to how this development would actually impact the recreational use of the land for the location? I hope that question makes sense.
Yep, Ms Tullamore.
Through you, Mayor, there was no trigger in the planning scheme for us to consider that. it would be outside the realms of the planning scheme about those access tracks.
But I think Mr Smee would like to add something.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So the land was required, council's intent to sell the land was publicly advertised. We received representations in relation to that proposed sale. They were around the walking track, and so we included within the conditions of the contract of sale a requirement for Taswater to licence back to council the particular route of that track.
Thank you. And I guess just to clarify, this isn't a question, but I hope it's okay. So these questions are coming from, I guess, the plan that was in the latest recycled water treatment plant DA, that doesn't seem to reflect where the walking track actually is compared to what was proposed to the community back at that time when the land was going to be disposed. And I'm almost done, thank you.
That's all right.
As part of the Taswater development in 2016, the DA included the demolition of the old residence at the site and a promise to fully rehabilitate the land to reinstate the existing natural and ecological values of the site. Since the demolition, it looks like the area is still fenced off and hasn't been rehabilitated. Could you please advise when the full rehabilitation of this site will occur by Taswater and what that full rehabilitation will involve?
Ms Tullamore.
Through you, Mayor, I'll need to take that on notice to look up the details of that.
Thanks. And then finally, I have a few that are specifically in relation to the Suncoast Headlands Walking Trail. And so this is where it runs through the land at 112 Tinderbox Road. Could you please advise where council are proposing the track will be rerouted to, given the current location of the track, where we feel it is, was established with residents' input to find the safest path for the trail that didn't run under the white gum trees and also protected residents' privacy?
Mr Smee, sounds like one for you.
Through you, Mayor, I haven't been involved in the detailed planning for the track, so I'd need to take that on notice.
Thank you. If I could also ask what consultation will occur with the community and local residents about the proposed relocation of the trail and the proposed installation of signage and bollards, and when might that consultation occur?
Mr Smee.
Through you, Mayor, I'd also need to take that on notice.
Thank you. In relation to the white gum trees, we've had two drop limbs causing significant property damage, despite having arborists assess our trees. And I wondered how frequently are the white gum trees on the Taswater land assessed by an arborist, and whose responsibility is for this to occur?
Mr Smee.
Through you, Mayor, they're on Taswater's land, so it's Taswater responsibility to assess them in accordance with their risk management planning for the site.
And I think that answers my final question, which was, should a serious incident occur if people were walking under there, what entity is potentially liable for personal injury? So I assume that would be Taswater.
Through you, Mayor, I wouldn't want to give a definitive answer on that because there may be circumstances in which it's not Taswater, but generally speaking, the landowner is the owner of the trees and therefore the owner of the liability.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms Winter. Just in relation to the questions we've taken on notice, the answers will appear in the next agenda.
Thank you.
Thanks
for your time.
Is there anybody else who'd like to ask a question?
Are we still on? Yep. Charles Biggins, Leslie Vale. We heard from the Mayor at last meeting that council must operate as a business. It must remain solvent. This is true, but council is neither a business nor is it government. It is a body corporate entity. You are the directors, the ratepayers are the members. We also heard at that meeting that important functions of local council has been bypassed, that the councillors debated the options presented to them at several budget workshops. The Mayor sought consensus from the councillors behind closed doors, and the councillors participated in an informal vote. Are councillors aware of how many standards of the local government good governance guide they have just broken?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Biggins. I think you're misinterpreting what I said at the last meeting in relation to the budget discussions that we've had to date. You are correct in that we are fully aware that we are not permitted to make decisions at council workshops. However, what we did determine was the consultation process going forward. And because we needed a starting point, at no time did we take a final vote on the budget, because what we were discussing was a range of options and then talking about what the starting point is that we go out to consultation. We have several more budget workshops to come. We have one next week on the 22nd. Then after the consultation closes, we have another one on the 13th of May. And at the one on the 13th of May, we will be able to look through the feedback that we have been provided with from the community and make any alterations to the budget that we deem necessary at that point. And then 2 weeks later, on the 3rd of June, the budget will come before council for its final deliberation and then the vote.
The Local Government Meetings Procedures Act is very clear about what must be included in agendas and minutes, and stipulates that there must be public access to those documents. Because the draft budget decisions were made in a workshop, none of it is on public record. The information that was discussed and the decisions that were agreed upon by councillors are critical to the future direction of this municipality and of the utmost public interest to the ratepayers, the body corporate membership. So why was a councillor debate and decision making on such an important matter allowed to occur at a closed information gathering workshop?
So a workshop, council has workshops nearly every second Monday, and they cover a range of topics. Workshops are an opportunity for staff to brief councillors on issues that are of either just purely information. For example, it might be all of the things that we do in relation to emergency management as a council, because that's not something, particularly if you're new to council, having just been elected, you may not be aware of that. We also sometimes have workshops which are presentations where people external to council will come and provide information on something. Could be a range of topics. For example, the University of Tasmania came to see us before they lodged their development application for the IMAS facility at Taroona to provide us with information around it, or it could be discussions on future policy positions that council might take. So if we are updating a policy and it's quite complex, we might have a workshop to work that through so that everybody understands the proposed changes, and it's an opportunity for us to provide any feedback to staff at that time. If, for example, if at a workshop like that, a majority of people didn't agree with something that a councillor was going to, that the staff were going to put forward, then that's an opportunity to have a frank and open discussion about that. So workshops occur in closed session because sometimes there is information that is not appropriate to put into the public arena. Workshops are commonplace in local governments all around Tasmania, and workshops are permitted under the Local Government Act. So we have not breached anything in relation to inappropriate decision-making behind closed doors or whatever shadow you want to cast on that. We have followed appropriate procedures in terms of having discussions and then being able to go out to the community with a starting point for the budget discussions.
The Local Government Good Governance Guide clearly states that workshops are to inform councillors of the subject matter, but debate and decision-making is to be done in open meetings so that the ratepayers, the body corporate membership, can follow the decision-making process. This is not Parliament. You are not ministers, and the workshops are not cabinet meetings. The public interest has already been prejudiced by these actions. Will Council please publish a full transcript of the budget workshops so that the ratepayers can be informed of Council's underlying financial predicament and the community consultation period be extended accordingly?
Unfortunately, we're not in a position to extend the public consultation period because then we can't meet the timeframes of being able to have an additional workshop and then pass the budget on the anticipated date of the 3rd of June. That's a timetable that we do need to stick to. In relation to the first part of your question, I stress again, we have not made any decisions, as you put it, under the shadows of darkness or whatever thing you're trying to imply here. We are fully aware as councillors that we are not sitting here as cabinet ministers. I've been there and done that, and that's not a thing I want to ever return to. But we get to have an opportunity where we get to ask questions of staff and make sure that we understand things and go through the minute details of things. Workshops are an accepted practice of councils all around Tasmania and elsewhere, and you can make out that they are some sort of hidden cloak and dagger thing, but unfortunately, Mr Biggins, that is not the case.
Council discussed and agreed upon a 12% rate rise at a workshop.
Mr Biggins.
Yeah, that was never voted. That was never voted on an account.
Mr Biggins, that is not true. What you are saying just then is incorrect. It is factually incorrect, and you're not listening to what I have already said. What I have already said is that we did not make a decision in relation to the budget. We made a decision out of a starting point of going out to consultation. We did not make a decision as we're not allowed to vote at workshops. So we had a long discussion, as we will be having further discussions, but what we did decide was that we decided on the time frame of the consultation, the form that the consultation would take, to clarify the process moving forward. But please don't put words into my mouth.
Moving on. We heard from the General Manager when questioned by Councillor Street in February that Council was only being made aware of significant depreciation losses as older assets are replaced or upgraded. Doesn't this point to serious anomalies in Council's own accounting practices? In business, if I want a loan, I need to provide the bank with financial statements from my accountant. If I was to ask my accountant to adjust those figures so the bank would look more favourably upon my application, that would be an act of fraud. Has Council ever relied upon their own accounting records for financial loans or grants?
Mr Biggins, I wholeheartedly reject any assertion that what Council is doing in relation to any aspect of our financial management relates to fraud. That is a very strong word to be using. We have an audit committee which has external parties on it that meets 6-7 times a year. We have the Auditor General who audits Kingborough Council as well as the other 28 councils in the state, and we have a group of staff who are highly skilled in financial management and accounting and the technical skills required. So any suggestion by you that we have been engaging in some sort of fraud is highly inappropriate and highly offensive. Every month we publish our financial reports that are available for everyone in the community to see. They are comprehensive. There is one in this year's agenda for this evening, and that clearly shows across all the different areas, the different expenditure, the overall depreciation. The reports go into detailed explanations as to why certain things have happened. In relation to the depreciation that you're talking about, you know very well, I hope, that the issue has come about because of the revaluation of our assets, in particular our stormwater assets, which has resulted in increased depreciation costs, which have been a significant impost on council and continue to be. Our asset base has continued to grow, and it's magnificent that we have $850 million worth of assets. As costs have increased, our assets have increased, but the replacement value over the life of the assets has also increased. And what we are now having to do is ensure that we can keep up with that so that we are not leaving a legacy in 20 or 30 years' time, which is aged assets which are no longer fit for purpose, that council has no money to replace.
Thank you. According to Kingston Park Implementation Report, July 2022, Kingborough Council had at the time spent $28 million on the Kingston Park redevelopment between the years 2012 and 2022, and Council received $4.5 million in government grants, borrowed $11.7 million in low and no interest loans, and received $2.5 million from land sales during that 10-year period. But even with all the grants, loans and sales, there was still in excess of $9 million shortfall. Was this shortfall in revenue taken out of Council's own cash reserves that had been previously set aside for a rainy day?
Mr. Spinks, would you like to assist us with that one?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, it's correct to say that the Kingston Park project was funded from a variety of sources, borrowings, grants and other things. So to the extent that those other sources didn't fund the entirety of the project, the remainder came from Council's internal resources. That's correct.
For the last 12 years, Council has been sinking so much public money into Kingston Park. Isn't this the real underlying reason that Council has recorded a, quote, operating losses for 10 out of the past 12 years, and the real reason why the asset replacement account is so depleted? Council is recording a $2.3 million operating loss this year and forecasted a $2.9 million loss next year. Aren't these the same years that the $6 million in short-term interest-free loans matures? Isn't the 23-24 and 24-25 financial years the years when these loans for Kingston Park are due to be repaid to the state government in full?
It is correct, Mr. Biggins, that there are some loans in relation to Kingston Park that are now accruing interest that were originally interest-free, and that has had an impact on our bottom line. The interest is around $600,000 per year. It had initially been anticipated when we entered into the agreement with the developers for Kingston Park that it would have been completed by now, and we would have been recouping all of the money from the majority of the stages, which would have meant that we had initially not, the initial strategy was that we would not need to trigger the interest payments on those loans when the interest became due after the interest-free period expired. However, unfortunately in that time there's been a range of factors, including the pandemic, which effectively halted a lot of work, and then of course has been a significant upturn in building and construction costs, and council and developers are not immune to that. And so the continued development of Kingston Park has been delayed, as it's not the climate at the moment for the developers to be able to make it a profitable investment for them. We are continuing to have discussions with them because obviously we want to see the land developed and the project completed. And we are also, of course, keen to see the remainder of the money flow to us, because as the projects, the way that the contract was with the developers was framed, is that we would get a percentage of the land sales as and when the properties settle. And because there are 2 apartment buildings and 1 commercial building that have not been commenced as yet, that money is delayed in flowing through to us, and so that is impacting on us. That is a factor based on the economic climate of developers right around Tasmania and indeed right around the country. These same developers are also doing a range of projects interstate, and it is exactly the same in New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria and other places. So unfortunately, the timing of those sort of things created almost the imperfect storm and have added to the situation that we're now in.
Thank you. I totally get that business is a gamble, and it often doesn't work out the way you planned. But this is a body corporate, and the membership will have no sympathy for a council that cannot look at their own high-risk business-like decisions and accept that some of it didn't work out. Time for council to cut its losses. Kingborough Waste Services, Kingborough Sports Centre and Traders in Purple are all wholly owned council businesses, are they not? Didn't anyone at the budget workshops consider the option of selling one or more of the council's wholly owned business enterprises in order to balance its books, pay off its loans and replenish its asset renewal account before holding its hand out for more rates from the body corporate membership in a cost of living crisis?
Just to correct you, Mr Biggins, the Kingborough Sports Centre is not a separate business that we own. They are a department of Kingborough Council, just as our planning department is, or any other department. So it is not it does not operate as a separate business. Its financial situation is part of our books, and certainly it has been operating very, very well and above expectations in recent years. I can assure you that when looking at our financial situation, we have looked at a range of different scenarios, we have done modelling, and we will continue to look under every stone and make sure that nothing is left unchecked. It's not as simple as deciding to sell off something like Kingborough Waste Services, which is also performing very well and which returns occasional dividends to us in the terms which provides an opportunity for us, and we have an interest to ensure that Kingborough Waste Services continues to operate in a way that is acceptable, and it appears to be a model that even people who, when it was first established 15 or so years ago, doubted its capabilities and its capacity, and it has now been performing very, very well indeed. So we're not looking at having a fire sale of any of our departments or our investment in KWS, but I appreciate the suggestion. Traders and Purple are not. Traders and Purple are a separate business that are a developer that we entered into a partnership development agreement with. So we have no capacity. We are not an owner of Traders and Purple. Traders and Purple are a standalone property developer that we entered into a partnership with.
Okay, so that's not an interest that council can
No.
financially...
No, they are a commercial developer like any commercial developer. They just happened, we put out expressions of interest for different entities to develop on the land at Kingston Park, and they were the ones that were selected after a rigorous selection process.
Thank you very much. My intention is not to offend, but to underline the gravity of transparency. The workshops particularly around budget, is something to be very careful about. And the more that you can disclose to the public, I really think that council has done themselves a misservice by putting so much through workshops and not bringing the final decision making, even on a draft, an amount.
Thank you. Is there another question, Mr.
No,
Burns?
thank you very much.
Thank you
For your time. Cheers.
Thank you. Any further questions from the public gallery? Thank you. If you could just come to the microphone, state your name and the suburb in which you live, please. And we just need to turn on the light on the top. Thank you.
My name is Natalie Kingston and I live at Blackmans Bay. And my questions tonight are also in relation to DA number 2023-174, the recycled water. My first question in relation to the use of the area and the existing sewage treatment plant traffic. On page 20 of the Ordinary Council meeting agenda number 6 on the 3rd of April for last time, and I quote, "The proposed variation can be supported pursuant to this performance criteria of the zone for the following reasons." And one of the dot points, "The use of land in the open space zone is for access to the site only. The access is already used to access the existing sewage treatment plant. This is actually incorrect. I live in close proximity to this area, as do others that I have spoken with. There is no traffic that uses the road. It is a road that was used by the residents that used to be in existence, that was knocked down, and no one's used that road, no one's lived in that house. Or my question is, were you aware in the decision-making process that this was incorrect information?
Ms. Tyler Moore, would you like to assist us with that?
Through you, Mayor, the access through the site was assessed by our development engineers and our planner based on the information provided to us by the applicant. Whether we're talking about the same access road or not is difficult to ascertain, but I'm happy to take a question on it and get back to you directly rather than a question, or I could do a question on notice, that's fine, because noting the decision has been made on that application.
That would be great if I could grab an answer to that one. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take that on notice.
Thank you. Also, in the last Ordinary Council meeting agenda number 6 for the 3rd of April, on pages 16, 17 and 18, in particular page 18 states, in the words on the document, and the bit down the bottom is not, it's from the document, not my grammar, "The cut and fill is located a minimum of 40 metres from adjoining properties and will be screened by landscaping and retained vegetation. Therefore, there will be no unreasonably impact on privacy," end quote. Section 2.5.11, addressing the representation states, requires redirection to the correct alignment of the walking track. I have extensive information collaboration through several community engagement officers at Taswater, extensive emails about the final location. My question is, when you were deciding on the decision of the application in question, was the question about privacy, was there a consideration to privacy of the residents, of the impact of the positioning and location based around the fact that the rerouting would affect the privacy of the residents? And I hope I've structured that in a way that makes sense.
Thank you. Ms Tullamore.
Through you, Mayor, the matter of the rerouting the walking track and the walking track itself is actually outside the parameters of the planning application. Yes, it's noted, it's in there, and it was raised by the residents, and it was discovered through that it's not in the correct alignment. So other teams, such as our Trucks and Trails team and our property services, will be looking at that. But the assessment of the DA was really about the recycle plant, so it does sit outside of it. So council will need to address that, but it'll be through property services or our Parks and Trails team.
Thank you. Do you have another question?
Please note that, yes, and please note my question is, was it considered, and maybe in future, should it be considered from that aspect as well, I'd like noted. Thank you. My next question is, there is a recommendation on page 35 of the Environmental Assessment Report that was dated February 2024, one of the attachments in the lot of documents that we all received, of the hundreds of pages we all got. From the document, a place called CAS, and I'm just a bit nervous and can't remember what it stands for, but I'm sure you do, suggested that the proponent confirm whether any trees to be removed may affect or impact the masked owl, and if they were present, and that CAS should be contacted for further advice if there was potential for tree removal to impact the masked owl or any other threatened species, and a recommendation for a report. I've read all of the documentation back, and whilst it addressed a lot of other stuff, it did not address the recommendation from CAS or give us any information about whether that was taken into consideration when making a decision about approving or not approving that application.
Ms Tullamore.
Through you, Mayor, I'd need to take a detailed question about a report within the decision on notice.
That would be fantastic. Just two more.
That's all right.
It would be a reasonable assumption that the proponent was fairly confident in proceeding with the pipeline, given the extensive associated costs in drilling a pipeline, that if there wasn't a pump station, it would be null and void. So it could be reasonable to assume that they were confident in this application. Given that statement, we have the pipe in the last meeting, and I quote from Ms McNeil, and I also would like taken into account, if anyone goes back to rewatch it, the tone and body language of this statement. We have the pipeline that we have already approved, and it would seem incredible to refuse the use of water. We have approved a pipeline to supply to the other side of the river, end quote. Whilst I also don't oppose the use of recycled water through a pipeline, I do oppose the location and its impact on myself and other residents. Can you, without doubt, based on this information, really say there is no bias in the decision-making process given this information and an email from the pipeline resonance group saying that clearly the site has been chosen for its financial benefits and relative flatness of the site and proximity to the existing plant?
Ms Tullamore.
To answer the first part, business confidence and cost of development is no consideration of ours at all. Makes no difference to us whether they make any money or not as a planning authority. We're just obliged to consider the requirements of the planning scheme. And I say with confidence that there was not bias in the assessment. The assessment is very transparent in the details of the assessments against this scheme. If it was considered that there was error in making that decision or non-compliance in making those decisions, and that was to go before the tribunal, then that would be tested, and I'm confident that there's definitely no bias.
And lastly, given all of the points made so far, given that there is, and I received the same documents as the final decision makers, being the people that we voted in for us, our elected councillors, I have presented tonight that there is missing information in the decision-making process about a particular masked owl. There is misinformation and lack of information around the impact on the walking track, and there is incorrect, in my view, and those that live in the close proximity, about the information on the use of the road. Given these three statements, I'm asking, could there be due consideration to having a reassessment of this so that those that are involved in the decision-making process can include the holistic information, because the only other right of way that someone like myself has is the appeal process, which has a financial cost, and with the cost of living, I don't think it is fair and reasonable that I should have to find additional funds when there is clearly flaws in this process.
Ms.
Thank you.
Tyler Moore.
Through you, Mayor, it'd be up to the councillors whether they wanted to review it or not, because they sat as the planning authority. It was a report recommendation from our department. But in simple terms, the decision has been made by the planning authority under LUPA. So the decision is made, they can't undo the decision unless, I've forgotten the section number, it was a cancellation of a permit, but it wouldn't really qualify for that. But it'll be up to the councillors to decide what they'd like to do sitting as a permanent authority.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other further questions? If you'd like to come up and state your name and your suburb, please.
Yeah, hello, my name is Jamie King. I live in Blackmans Bay, and a lot of the questions tonight I'll be asking will be around development application 2023/174. The first thing I'd like to say is, before I start talking about clauses and things like that, tonight we've heard a lot about there is no need to consult. That is outside of this area. There is no need for that. I'd just like to just remind the members in the public and maybe the people watching at home that on your webpage it says for community engagement, Kingborough Council values the community's input on projects, strategies and policies, and acknowledge the effective communication and engagement are essential to building a strong community. By promoting an active exchange of information and ideas, Council aims to support a safe and healthy, connected community. So that being said tonight, guys, we've had a number of statements that people have brought up that I believe also relate to the community engagement. My first real question to the council tonight...
Before you go on, Mr King, if I could just respond to that. Some of the questions that have been asked specifically in relation to the planning process. And the planning process is very clearly set down under a specific act. And that tells councils or planning authorities specifically what they can and cannot do. So when we are going through the process, when we're sitting as a planning authority, we sit in a different capacity as we are at the moment as councillors. And when our planning staff are making the assessments, they have to follow exactly the assessment process as outlined in the Act. And sometimes, unfortunately, the way that that Act is drafted and the planning scheme is drafted, there are some things that one would expect would be in there, like loss of amenity of view or something like that, and they are not covered by that. So there are things that we cannot do. We have to assess every project in the same way. Otherwise, we open ourselves up to appeal processes through TASCAT. And, so we have a responsibility to follow very clearly the way that we assess those processes.
Okay. Does Council have a local area objective and desired future character statement for the environmental living zone and the open space zone affected in that development?
Ms Tyler-Moore.
Through you, Mayor, it may come as a surprise I don't recall the entirety of the planning scheme. Certainly if there was one, it would have been captured in the report. I can sit here and look it up. There are local area objectives for a number of our areas, but it's important to understand that the local area objectives have limited weighting in its decision making, unfortunately, and I can tell you from experience of a matter we've dealt with to be very disappointed it doesn't get given as much weight as it possibly should. So I can look that detail up, but it doesn't have a lot of weighting because you must look at the relevant zones and codes and the acceptable solutions and correlating performance criteria in that.
Okay. So the visual impact, it says in the statement there is reasonable expectation that land in the coastal proximity of environmental living zone would retain a scenic natural state, and it is understood by the applicant that the industrial development will disrupt the existing scenic conditions. Use of this space then becomes discretionary through approval by councillors on recommended advice and processes. Does council believe this development meets 14.1, 14.12, 14.1.3, 14.1.1.4 and 14.1.1.6?
Ms Tyler-Moore.
Through you, Mayor, the assessment is included in the report, including the attachment at the back, which provides a response to each and every relevant and applicable provision of the planning scheme under the zones and the overlays. So the report resulted in that it did comply with either the acceptable solutions or the performance criteria.
Thank you. Mr King.
Where are we? So clause 19.3.5, discretionary use of an open space. Discretionary use must complement and enhance the use of the land for recreational purposes by providing for facilities and services that augment and support permitted use or no permit required use. There is no acceptable solution under the clause, therefore it must be assessed against the performance criteria. And as we just heard from Ms Kingston, there might be a couple of disagreements or discrepancies within that performance criteria. How will we move forward with that with council?
Ms Tyler-Moore.
Through you, Mayor, as I responded to Ms Winter, if the residents are unhappy with council's decision and believe that it has been made incorrectly, there's an opportunity for appeal. All
right, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Are there any further questions from members of the public? No, thank you. We will move on. We are now on questions on notice from the public. There were two. The first is from Ms Landon in relation to a planning scheme amendment and public open space contribution policy, with a response from Ms Tyler-Moore. And the second one is in relation to proposed rate increases from Mr Ward and an officer response from Mr Spinks. Takes us to page 3, questions without notice from councillors. Does any councillor wish to ask a question? Councillor Cordova and then Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mayor. I've got two questions. Can you hear me? This sounds quiet to me.
I can.
Okay, that's right. Two questions. The first one is actually in relation to just to clarify motion to overturn decisions. So just in relation to DA 2023-174, we just heard that it is possible to review decisions. I can see in section 18 of the Meeting Procedures Regulations 2015 that there's a provision for a decision by council to be overturned in whole or in part. And we heard earlier that, you know, it's up to the council to review if we want to. So my question is, if this council were to revisit that decision about the recycled water treatment plant, DA 2023-174, would that be achieved under section 18 of the Meeting Procedures Regulations, or is there some other provision in the Local Government Act or the Land Use Planning Approvals Act or the Kingborough Interim Planning Scheme? Is there some other provision to overturn decisions? How would we do it?
So my reading of that is that relates to decisions of council and not of the planning authority, but I might be incorrect, but Mr. Smee is our resident governance expert, and I'm sure he can give us some guidance.
Mayor, I would concur with your view on that.
So that relates to, that section does relate to us sitting as a council as we are now, not as a planning authority.
Thank you. So just the second question then, if I may, Mayor, is there a mechanism under either LUPA or the Local Government Act or the Kingborough Interim Planning Scheme for us to overturn a decision? And if we were to do that, would that happen before or after an appeals process to TASCAT? Like, when would we do it?
Ms. Tullamore.
Through you, Mayor, I don't believe there is, but I would like an opportunity to check the relevant part of the Act, but I'm fairly confident there's not.
We can take that one on notice.
Thank you, Mayor. So my next question is about roadkill and state growth roads, and this is about protecting wildlife. So a constituent has raised with me the very concerning and increasing amount of roadkill. In this case, it was particularly between Margate and Kingston on the Channel Highway, but also I've been talking to people, and I've seen it myself, between Leslie Vale and Kingston on the Huon Highway. I've personally noticed, a lot around this Summerlees Road overpass. The amount of wildlife killed there is appalling. And of course, we all know that removing wildlife or roadkill from the roads in a timely manner is very important to avoid other predators going to the side of the road and, devils, Tassie devils and the like, that might prey on those carcasses. So it's important to move them quickly. My first question on this is it Kingborough Council's responsibility to clean up the roadkill on state growth roads, or do they have their own teams that do that?
I believe they have their own teams, but I think Mr. Reeve will be able to tell us that.
Through you, Mayor, yeah, that's correct. They have their own maintenance teams that will do that.
Thank you. So through you, Mayor, how frequently do they remove roadkill on sections of highway within Kingborough? Is there clean-up like a regularly scheduled thing, or is it ad hoc, like when they see more they'll go out? And do we play a role in telling them where to go?
Before I throw to Mr. Reeve, I have to say I did notice it over the Easter period. I can't remember which day. I think it might have been Easter Monday. I was driving somewhere, and I was driving from Kingston into the city on the Southern Outlet, and I actually lost count of... no, it was Easter Tuesday, sorry, because I was going off to work, and there was... I think I lost count at 40. And that was just in that 12-kilometre section. And I think it's because they hadn't worked over the Easter period. And so there'd been a significant increase. And as you say, then when they're not picked up, other wildlife comes on to scavenge from that. And it was very confronting. And I did notice a car then coming along behind me, and that was picking some of it up. But Mr. Reeve might have more idea of the schedule.
Through you, Mayor, I'm not aware of the exact schedule, but it's very similar to council in terms of the fact that DSG actually have Stornoway as their maintenance. They do regular inspections on all the highways they actually look after and have service levels they need to apply for roadkill in particular. Yes, it's quite possible that over that Easter period there, they may not have actually had that same schedule in place. Generally in that situation there is the opportunity for people to actually contact after hours, and there's an opportunity for that to actually be addressed. But look, I'm hesitant to actually give any more information than that because it's obviously not our contract and not our agreement.
Councillor Cordover, I could suggest now that the government has been sworn in that we could write a letter on behalf of council to the, I guess in this case it would be the Minister for Infrastructure, who I believe is still Mr. Ferguson, advocating, asking about what the schedule is and pointing out that, in particular times that it seems to not get the attention that it deserves, and that compounds the problem. So happy to do that if you'd like.
Thank you so much, Mayor. I think that would be great, actually. And I also think in terms of investment, potentially if we can advocate to the state government they probably have a bigger pot of money than we do to do that. Not just in terms of the timeliness of cleaning roadkill, but I've long advocated for improved mitigation measures that are installed in the roads, whether that's acoustic fencing or the like. So, yeah, I've certainly been hearing a lot about it, so the more that we can do on that, the better. My question is now, aside from state growth, but I really would appreciate that letter. I think that's a wonderful initiative. Thank you, Mayor. In our proposed budget, do we know off the top of, how much is the allocation for roadkill removal? Are we increasing it? Are we decreasing it? And has there been any further analysis? Thank you very much, Councillor Dean. Yes, there's, am I correct that it's
Here's the answer that Councillor Dean prepared earlier.
So it's $52,000, if I'm correct, from the year-to-date actuals, 51,788. And so my question is to the analysis of whether or not it's actually cheaper to start installing these mitigation measures than it is to constantly spend 51 grand a year, 52 grand a year cleaning up wildlife with all of its concomitant suffering to animals, damage to vehicles, potential damage to human beings as well. Isn't it cheaper in the long run to invest in more wildlife protection, roadkill mitigation measures on our roads?
On council roads.
Correct.
Because I think that one of the huge issues is that it's happening so much on the highways where people are travelling at higher speed and therefore unable to, I'd like to say unable, I hope it's not unwilling to, but unable to stop safely to let the animal pass, which really does exacerbate the problem. And so that's why I'd really like to advocate to the state government for some trials on the Southern Outlet and the Huon Highway, etc., of some of those devices. But Mr. Reeve, would you like to add anything?
Through you, Mayor, look, it's a tricky one because effectively some of the mitigation measures you're talking about is things like acoustic fences, which they have trialled in a couple of locations down Huon Highway and so forth. They haven't been as successful as they would like them to be, and they're obviously relatively expensive to actually put in place. So as much as we would, love to actually try and put a lot of those measures in place, we tend to actually be stuck with actually trying to deal with some of the hotspot areas as compared to not. So we do have some guidelines that sit on our internet that talks about that side of things there in terms of where we may or may not be looking at putting some mitigation measures in. Obviously there's been a fair bit of work done in terms of looking at where signage and so forth can be put in place just to warn motorists that they may be entering a hotspot area. But some of the other more expensive structural ones there are quite expensive, and there's a number of them out there, as you're probably aware of. So yes, it's not it's a vexed issue, and there's no easy solution to it.
I'd just like to encourage everyone to slow down dusk till dawn. Thanks very much, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mayor. Just have a couple of questions about bus stops. The first one is, do we have any timeframes and information available in regards to moving the bus stops back from Kingston Park to the new bus stops on the Channel Highway in the CBD?
I understand it's around 4 to 6 weeks, but I don't know whether Mr. Reeve if that is correct.
Through you, Mayor, look, I'm not exactly sure of the exact time frame. I know we've had quite a few meetings with Department of State Growth in terms of actually finalising some of the details. So hopefully that will be happening shortly.
Imminently.
If you like.
Okay, second question. State Growth recently advised that they're upgrading to bus stops along Roslyn Avenue, which is great news. Following on from that, I've had a couple of inquiries as to why we haven't seen any progress being made with the Channel Highway Margate bus stop upgrade, given that was towards the top of the list of bus stops that we audited.
I did suspect it might be, I think it was number 3 on the list of bus stops as a result of that audit, and I wonder if it's been held up because of the development in Margate and also our Margate street planning. I did notice that they've also started work on bus stop number 30 in Taroona the other day, which is quite a very, very, probably the most difficult site that we have in order to get full accessibility compliance there. But Mr. Reeve, can you assist us any further with Margate?
Through you, Mayor, yes, that's correct. So Department of State Growth have a contractor who's working their way through tranche 1, so there's a couple of tranches in terms of actually accessible bus stops throughout the municipality. So Margate's one of them, and it is tied up with the supermarket development at the moment, so obviously they'll be looking to move into that space once they've finished some of their street frontage works.
Okay, Thank you.
Next I had Councillor Antoli and then Councillor Midgley. Councillor Antoli.
Thank you, Mayor. My question is again related to the bus stop on the Channel Highway. So with the one that has been out of commission where allegedly the turning circle is too tight for buses or words to that effect. So a lot of questions I have received from the public is whose fault is that? Was that council's fault when we did the upgrade of the Channel Highway Road, or is that a DSG issue, and how did that happen?
Mr Reeve. No, Mr Smee.
Through you, Mayor, I'm not sure that it's a case of fault. We worked very closely with both the Department of State Growth and Metro in relation to the design of the interchange. I guess, however, there's a difference between looking at plans and doing trial tests in a car park compared to the actual reality of manoeuvring an articulated bus within the space. And when we've actually come to the final product, some Metro drivers have expressed some reservations about that, and that's what we're working through with DSG. But certainly all of the design planning work was done in consultation with both staff from DSG and Metro, so I don't think there's a case that there's been errors made. I think it's a case that when something is actually in place rather than in plans, what was the best laid plans is not actually the case in reality.
So,
Councillor Antoli.
thanks, Mayor. So it's fair to say that we built the bus stop to the plans that they advised us on, is that right?
Correct. Yep. There is now a minor amendment that needs to take place, which is just shaving off about a half a metre to enable a smoother passage for an articulated bus.
And this is not the first rodeo DSG's been through when it comes to bus interchanges. Is there any sort of explanation as to how it is that they got it so wrong with their design, given that the bus drivers need a safe turning circle and know what a safe turning circle is?
Mr Smee.
Through you, Mayor, the situation, as I understand it, it relates to very minor changes to what is in place, and what was intended has been constructed in accordance with the plans that we developed in consultation with DSG and Metro. We had a trial run of those plans up in the Sports Centre car park using Metro buses. We've also had Metro buses use the real thing. We're talking very, very minor changes that are required to achieve an optimum alignment with the curb, and we're pretty confident that we will be able to achieve them and open that interchange shortly.
Right, and that refers to the 4 to 6 week period that was mentioned earlier. Okay, thank you. Naturally, the community is a bit frustrated it's taking so long. They have to work such a long distance, given that these are allegedly such minor changes. Can I ask, who's paying for the changes?
Mr Smee.
Through you, Mayor, that hasn't been determined, and we don't know at this stage whether there is going to be any significant costs associated with those changes.
Okay. Unfortunately, the significant cost has been the time and the imposition on the community, but thank you for answering the question. It's good clarity.
Thank you. Councillor Midgley and then Councillor Cordova.
Thank you, Mayor. Just an update, please, on the Margate Main Street, well, not really the Main Street, we'll call it the Margate Main Street, how the consultation and how the planning's going for that, please.
So the consultation has gone very well. We've had a large number of submissions, and we have a workshop scheduled, not next Monday, it must be the one after that, the 29th of April.
Great, thank you. And can I give a shout out, Mayor, to the Youth Week event on Friday and just make a couple of comments
because you asked
that?
it like a question, could you please... Yes, you may, and could you please tell me about it?
Thank you. So I attended the Youth Week event on Friday night, the Battle of the Bands, and just a shout out to the community services team who did a really fantastic job. Events are always a big thing, but I guess young people make up about 7,000 of our population in Kingborough, often the hidden voice, doing great things. It's a challenging time, the teenage years. There was 7 bands. It was a great performance, really showcased the talent that we have in Kingborough, and it was well attended by a variety of young people and families. And I just want to say, congratulations to all involved, and it's so great that at Kingborough Council we can celebrate Youth Week, and I understand it was funded by a Youth Week grant. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but it is so important that we do have these events in our community.
Thank you very much, and I'd echo your congratulations to our staff who not only secure the grant funding for these sorts of events, but who deliver them in a very professional manner for the benefit of the community. So I was very sad that I wasn't able to be there, but I did happen to walk past as some of the bands were warming up earlier in the afternoon, and it sounded pretty good. Thank you. Councillor Cordova, did you have another question?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just to, one other question about roadkill that's been passed along to me is, please can we define what a hotspot is with respect to our roads? That's the first question. Please can we define what a hotspot is? And the second one is, does Council endorse the use of the Roadkill TAS app? Personally, I haven't used this app, but do we know about it? Do we think it works, and do we encourage people to use the Roadkill TAS app?
My recollection is that we did put that on our website and encourage, when we had conversations about 12 months ago about roadkill, that we did draw that to the attention of the community via our website and suggest that they could use that as another method of informing state growth as to where those areas are. I'm not sure, Mr. Reeve, if you've got anything you'd like to add?
Through you, Mayor, yeah, that's my understanding too. In terms of the other part of the question, in terms of what a hotspot might actually be, what we're talking about there is where you might typically be getting crossings of animals going in at a particular location. Obviously you can get roadkill anywhere along any particular road. Very difficult to actually deal with that. You obviously can't put a flotilla of signage everywhere to deal with that or to warn people of that. So it's more about saying these are designated, not designated, but these are areas that wildlife will typically actually use, and it's also to do with the type of wildlife that might actually be crossing at those points as well. So, particularly if we're looking at any endangered type of wildlife, so that's where we want to take a lot more due care in terms of not only warning motorists, but also, that's where that might drive other particular things such as some mitigation as well at the same time.
So, for example, where we had the, because of the redevelopment of the wetlands, we had all of a sudden all the little ducklings crossing and had to put signage up and asking the community to be very careful around that area. So, and people were very kindly stopping where it was safe to do so to let them pass.
So we are keeping data on where those hotspots are as they change and move. We're keeping records of that, so we know where to...
I'm looking at Mr. Reeve to see if he's nodding.
Through you, Mayor. It is a little bit more ad hoc than that. So, typically what we'll get is we'll get questions from the community to say, we're worried about the roadkill in a particular area. It's generally going to be a rural area of some description. And, they'll be requesting things such as signage or trying to slow motorists down. That's the typical thing that you will actually get. Where we know there's going to be a point where you can clearly see there's lots of roadkill in one particular area, we do keep a record of that through our own work order system. And where we know that this is not just a transient type thing, that's where we might look at actually saying, we do need to actually provide some warning for motorists in particular, or we may actually look at other measures as well at the same time.
Thank you.
Can I just add to the to Mr. Reeves' answer? The thing we do need to be aware about in terms of what other mitigating strategies there might be, if you're looking at anything like crossings either under the road or over the road for native animals, the costs are quite prohibitive. You're looking at anything from $500,000 for an underpass through to about $2.7 million to $6 million for animal overpass crossings. So normally they are only used I've seen a couple of them in New South Wales on the side of going across very, very major highways, and they're normally done as part of a redevelopment where, say, a highway goes from 4 lanes to 8 lanes or something like that, and the cost is built into it, but they are very, very high. Councillor Dean.
Thanks, Mayor. Just one question actually around graffiti. It came up last council meeting, and I think we've all probably noticed, well, I definitely have anyway, a bit of an upturn. Even our brand new toilet block down in Taroona has already been graffitied.
Oh, you're joking.
There's 4 different tags / murals in there. That was a bit of a hotspot always, but I guess just a question to inform the public. How would one go about reporting that, and what resources do we have in terms of graffiti removal? On our land, I should say.
Yeah, so on our premises we have, it gets listed as a job for our works crew to remove the graffiti. Priority is given to graffiti that has explicit language or something that would be highly offensive or triggering to somebody. So it's done in priority. I don't have the figures in front of me at the moment about how much we spend overall on graffiti removal, because we have various components of it in different parts of the budget. I think it's around $50,000 a year, but Mr. Reeve might correct me. But since we had the discussion last week, I have been in contact with Inspector Colin Riley. We're having a meeting with him next Monday to discuss the rising impact of graffiti in Kingborough. He does tell me as a preliminary to that, we're certainly not alone, and I think, as I highlighted last week, some of the graffiti that is being done, the larger signage with particular words that is repeated in various locations, I'm not so sure it's being done by young people. I actually suspect it's older people, because they clearly have a car. They also have been travelling around the state and doing the same graffiti. It's quite an elaborate setup, because they would need ladders and poles and all sorts of things. It's not just someone going along with a can of spray paint. So I'm surprised that they haven't been caught more easily, given the amount of time that would be involved in the setup involved. So we're going to be having a discussion next week. I do understand that last weekend that 2 people were caught for graffiti in the Kingborough area. They were from out of the area, and they've been subsequently charged by police. But I want to have a more wide-ranging discussion with him as to what we can do, and I also want to really encourage the private property owners to remove the graffiti. But I also am going to explore the discussion that we had last week about planting trees in front of various things and encouraging property owners to do the same, to actually put up a barrier to actually the works being visible and seen, because that's what the graffiti artists want, is to showcase their work. And if you can put some sort of barrier up, preferably a natural one, then hopefully will act as a preventative method. But I am very sad to hear that the Taroona toilets have been targeted already. Mr. Reeve, did you want to add something?
Not particularly, Mayor. I just to actually say.
Well, I'm giving you the option. I know you may not want to, but
just to say, at the moment there we've spent about 14 grand or so this financial year on graffiti. It does vary from year to year. Most of it's on our buildings, so we do get some on our transport assets. You'll get underpasses and bits and pieces like that are often victims of graffiti. But we'll also be having our own internal meetings from an officer level there to have a look at our current guidelines and look at what the other guidelines that other councils have been using as well at the same time, and trying to pick up on some things that might be successful in other areas there, and trying to put those in place.
Councillor Dean.
So just to clarify, if the community spots them, they could just take a photo and send it to kc@kingborough.tas.gov.au.
Yeah, absolutely lodge it as a service request. That would be appreciated, so that we know and we can add it to the work plan. Any further Questions? No? Okay, we'll move on. We are now at questions on notice from councillors. At the time the agenda was compiled, there were no questions on notice. Petitions still being actioned, there are no petitions still being actioned. And over on page 4, at the time the agenda was compiled, there were no petitions that had been received. Takes us still on page 4, policy 3.9, rate rebate for conservation covenant policy with a recommendation on page 5. I'm looking for a mover and a seconder, please. Got a mover in Councillor Cordover and a seconder in Councillor Midgley. Councillor Cordover.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm pleased to be able to move this policy. The policy has been utilised since its adoption in 2003-4, and has provided equity in decision-making process relating to rebating of rates for property owners that apply conservation covenants to their property. This is actually it's a small amount of money, but it does encourage people to put a covenant on their property to protect natural biodiversity and natural habitat, which is very important. So notwithstanding the 2 typos in 9 and 10, I think the conservation covenant policy is a good one, and it was agreed at the last policy renewal that it should be indexed, so that the rebate amounts are indexed with a percentage increase in line with the residential general rate, and there's no other changes to this policy. So I guess I just want to stress that the policy, not only is it important as it encourages something that the municipality cares deeply about, which you can see in that key priority area of sustaining the natural environment, but also this currently affects just 48 properties, and the total amount being spent is $14,319, which in an organisation of our size really is a very small amount. So I think it's a small investment for a very significant outcome, particularly when it comes to protecting the Aristola skipper or the other very rare, critically endangered and threatened species that we have specific to this municipality, rare and endangered plant species groups. We are very lucky to live in this municipality, but we are, of course, have to be stewards of the amazing natural assets that we have. We do have to take care of them, not just for future generations, but for time immemorial, so that other people can benefit, but of course, so that natural environment that sustains us, that we protect that, because by protecting that, we are protecting ourselves. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Cordover. Any further contributions? Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a brief question. Curious to know what happens regarding this policy if it's found the landowner does something against the conservation covenant. For example, if they clear some trees, then how does that work with this policy?
She says looking around, looking. Mr. Spinks.
Through you, Mayor. So this program is administered through the Department of Natural Resource and Environment. But once a covenant is in place, they apply to council, and every application comes to council. Once it's in place, it's very difficult for us to identify if something in contravention of the covenant takes place. Certainly, if we become aware, we'll bring it to council's attention. Once they're in place, we do have a process where every 5 years, all the ones that are in place come back to council for reapproval. But I just say again, if something has happened in contravention, we may or may not know about it.
Councillor Bain.
No, that was all. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Councillor Cordover, you don't want to sum up?
I just want to say we should change the recommendation. So it's we should change it to say, it currently says, yes, thank you. Yeah, conservation covenant policy. Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to put the recommendation. All in favour? Aye. Against? Motion is carried unanimously. Takes us now to policy 3.6, sundry debt management policy, with a recommendation on page 11. Looking for a mover and a seconder. Mover in Councillor Gladeright, seconder in Councillor Midgley. Councillor Gladeright.
Thank you. The purpose of this report is to present a review of policy 3.6, sundry debt management policy. The policy has been utilised since its adoption in 2010 and has provided equity in the decision-making process relating to recovery of outstanding debts, and provides an opportunity for negotiated settlement of debts prior to undertaking legal action. The policy has been reviewed and some minor changes are recommended. I've had a look through. I consider everything to be sensible and I'm happy to support the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Gladright. I had a question on this policy that hopefully Mr Spinks can answer. One of the changes on page, page 13 at 4.1.1 is that the sentence was taken out which reads, finance staff will ensure that invoices are correctly addressed and contain sufficient information for the debtor to understand the charge and the due date. I was a little confused why we might be taking that out because that seemed to be quite important. Is that because that is somewhere else?
No, it was just taken out because we felt it was just sort of overly procedural. I think it's a given that we'll send out appropriate invoicing with appropriate details on them, so I didn't feel like it needed to be in the policy.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Take your word on that. Councillor Antoli.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to ask a question around section 3.2, in particular this 128 late payments. I suppose that's from the Act. Is that prescribed, those numbers there, the 10%, the timing, is that all prescribed under the Act and unchangeable? How does that work?
Mr Spinks.
Through you, Mayor. The maximum interest rate that we can apply each year is determined by the Act. Now, it's based upon the money market. I think it's at the end of February each year, and then we're entitled to take that base rate and add a risk premium to it, up to a maximum. So, yes, it's set in legislation, but it changes every year.
Thank you, if I may, Mayor.
Yes.
Thank you. I think the magic word is council may, as opposed to council must or will, given that we are potentially moving in towards a rate increase for the community. Should that policy be softened? Should it be left? I'd like to open it up for discussion on that or get some sort of clarity on that.
I think you'll find that I'm looking at the section of the Local Government Act here that's come from, and that is an exact excerpt from the Act, including, it just doesn't have the formula which is also added there. And the way that legislation is drafted, legislation always uses the word may rather than will or must. I used to argue this a lot with the Office of Parliamentary Counsel who draft legislation, and it is always in right through the Act, it's may, not will or must.
Thank you. Do we feel that we should have a separate policy built for, or a sub-policy built specifically around people who are in hardship and how that operates?
So we do have a hardship policy.
And does it apply to rates as well?
Yes, it does.
In general? Okay.
Yes, it does. Yep.
Great.
So we have a hardship policy that we re-endorsed not that long ago, I believe, certainly.
I don't recall.
I was only looking at it the other day. In fact, I've got a copy of it sitting on my desk, but we did, it's current.
Thank you. I'm just trying to advocate, I suppose, for where it may be not clearly articulated for those people that are doing it tough going forward.
So this sort of sundry debt management policy might, for example, apply where somebody has deliberately not paid their debts for their rates, for a period of time because they're a conscientious objector and
sovereign
citizen and believe that they shouldn't be entitled to do that, and the Act gives us power then to make attempts to secure the money by a variety of means, which we haven't had to do too many times in the years that I've been on council, thankfully.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, if not, Councillor Gladright, did you want to sum up? I'm going to put the recommendation now. It's as printed on page 11, moved by Councillor Gladright, seconded by Councillor Midgley. All those in favour? Against? Motion is carried unanimously. Takes us to page 18, Gormley Park Master Plan, with a recommendation on page 20. Do I have a mover and a seconder, please? I've got a mover in Councillor Dean and a seconder in Councillor Bain. Councillor Dean.
Thanks, Mayor. Look, what we're here is just to endorse the master plan for Gormley Park. Previous decisions, or a few previous decisions from us, but the most recent was to approve the reallocation of funding towards the development of a master plan for Gormley Park. It's pretty self-explanatory. In terms of what it produces is a high quality athletics track, which includes a 400-metre track, which is currently not present at the Little Lass area, and in addition a second turf wicket, which, look, if finally approved at some point and built, I'm sure would be very pleasing to the community, and particularly the user groups that currently have to travel fair distances in our juniors to play cricket in other municipalities, but also for our junior program, the Little Lass, would be very appreciative. I guess it's worth noting our financial situation is that while at the moment we are only endorsing the master plan, we are not providing any additional funding per se to this at this point. But I'm not without hope, given that what's happened in the recent election, and I don't wish another election on us anytime soon. But I would point out that we did make some progress in receiving some funding commitments for that project. So either way, I think that's a project that is really promising for both those user groups, very exciting, and I look forward to this being endorsed and down the track, hopefully getting another funding commitment to get this up and running in future years.
Thank you, Councillor Dean. Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mayor. Agree with a lot of what Councillor Dean said. Some great outcomes here for the Knights Cricket Club, for Little Athletics, and I think it's great to see the addition of some pedestrian connections through to Clackass Drive, Queen's Parade, and also through down to Spring Farm to encourage people to ride their bikes or walk to the facilities. As has already been said, Council's budget at the moment is very, very tight, so hopefully by endorsing this master plan, it's going to allow Little Athletics and Kingborough Knights to apply for some external grants to try and fund these works. So happy to endorse.
Thank you, Councillor Bain. Councillor Midgley.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, echo all those sentiments. Just got a couple of questions around the communication and consultation. So in regards to that, the master plan being developed with stakeholders, just who are all of the stakeholders at the consultation included in the master plan, please?
Mr. Smee.
Through you, Mayor. So this process has been driven by Kingborough Little Athletics Centre. So obviously council are a key stakeholder as the owner of the grounds, the Kingborough Knights Cricket Club, the Tigers Football Club, and the Kingborough Lions Soccer Club are the other major stakeholders, in addition to the Kingston High School, who may well use the facility for their athletic carnivals.
Great, thank you very much. And another question in regards to consultation 7.3, it's noted that the addition of a new oval is proposed on an area currently leased to the Southern Dog Obedience Club. Have they at all been involved in any conversations?
Mr. Smee.
Through you, Mayor, they have not been involved in the development of this master plan because it effectively takes over their site. They are aware that the master plan is being developed, and they are aware that if it was implemented, we would need to find them a new location. We've previously done a precinct plan that does propose a new location for them, and they were certainly part of that consultation. So whilst they haven't been sitting around the table as a stakeholder, they are an impacted stakeholder, and as I say, if implemented, we'll need to do some further work with them in relation to where their new home might be, bearing in mind that there is the potential for them to stay on the ground. And I'm aware that obedience clubs in Hobart do use sports grounds, so that is also a potential. But there would need to be some further engagement with that particular group when we get to the stage of implementation.
Thank you. And just wondering about the Kingston Community Garden site as well. I can't see there's any impact, but...
No, there's no impact. It's outside of the scope.
Yep, great. Thank you.
Councillor Cordover, I think you had your light on.
Thank you, Mayor. I support this proposal and I look forward to the council endorsing it. Even though we all know this to be true and it's self-evident, I'll just say it for the record that the contribution of these clubs is enormous. The health and wellbeing benefits are enormous. The amazing debt of gratitude that we all owe, well, it's amazing what the volunteers contribute, and we all owe them an enormous debt of gratitude because of the countless hours of parents and supporters and the athletes themselves. And, you know, this is what makes community wonderful, and it's what brings us together and gives us a great sense of identity with our local community, and that's why it's so important to invest in this infrastructure, and council plays that pivotal role in being the catalyst to be able to make these amazing things happen. I spend a lot of time at the Kingborough Sports Precinct, and I know full well how, just in terms of people's mental health, when people are going through difficult times, to be together and to do things that improve your health and wellbeing, it's a remarkable achievement. So a big shout out to everyone, and of course the Kingborough Little Athletic Centre. They're providing this enormous service, and I'm very pleased that this master plan does speak to that. I also want to reflect on the financial situation that council is in and recognise that were it possible, I would certainly support council leaning in more heavily when it comes to investing in sports infrastructure, and I've been a very, loud advocate for things like an aquatic facility for Kingborough. I just wanted to, highlight the financial aspect of this, and so we're looking at points 5.1, 5.2, 5.3 and 5.4 here. Essentially, the implementation of this plan would require significant capital funding with new projects and upgrades to existing assets. They will add to council's depreciation costs. So if and when council does lean in, or even if we're lucky enough to get big state and federal government grants that help us build new assets, there will be a depreciation element and a maintenance element to that, of which we need to be aware. The addition of a new oval will add to council's turf maintenance costs, particularly in relation to the inclusion of a second turf wicket. Now, we all well know the arguments of why it's really important to get that second turf wicket, but I just wanted to, point out that we have these counterbalancing, we need to balance the interests of the whole community. So a great majority of the community actually enjoy our tracks and trails, and yet there is a disproportionate funding towards turf maintenance as opposed to tracks and trails. That's just one example of how we're trying to be fair to the whole community and try and give utility to the majority of people to enjoy a maximum number of wonderful things to do in Kingborough. And so if most people are walking on tracks and trails, we need to invest adequately in tracks and trails as well as on turf maintenance. So I'm just trying to paint a sense of the balancing act that council needs to play here. It's intended that the master plan will assist stakeholders to obtain external funding for their respective projects, and that to me is the most critical element of this. It is a glossy new document that gives it puts the ideas onto a page, and that then lets the clubs go out and get funding. And without this document, they wouldn't really be in a good enough position to get that external funding. So that's why it's so crucial that this passes tonight. So finally, I'm just going to say that I'm very happy to support the plan, as it doesn't require the immediate expenditure of council's money. However, I think in future we also need a clear plan to manage the ongoing maintenance and depreciation costs, and also we need to have fairness baked into this system, because I would hate to think that it's mutually exclusive, that when we invest in Gormley Park, we're doing that at the expense of an aquatic centre for Kingborough. I think we do ultimately want both. We're a growing municipality. We need to invest for our future, and we need to make sure that we're not making trade-offs like that. So I'm really excited about the opportunities that this master plan brings, but I don't want to do that at the expense of things like an aquatic centre for Kingborough. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Midgley, did you have another question?
Yes, I do have another question. Just noting the text on this master plan is very small, both in our, if you're on the computer and the printed out version. Will it be located somewhere so that the general public can actually read it? And also, it's only one page as well, the master plan. Just wondering, is it only one page or is there more information?
Through you, Mayor, no, the intent is for it to be a one-pager where everything's captured on that one page. That's what we're looking to do for all of our sports grounds. We found that to be far more beneficial than 50 pages of text. You know, all of the stakeholders are really comfortable that everything that needs to be captured is captured within this master plan. We will obviously place that on our website where it can be printed or blown up as you require.
I just need glasses, okay.
Well, I've got to say, I've just enlarged it on my screen, and when you enlarge it big enough to see it, the text actually goes fuzzy. So unless I squint, that's not helping either. So we may need to separate the text out, perhaps, and then put the photograph next to it so it's actually legible, because it's not.
I will put a high quality upload on. It's because it's been converted to a PDF, so we'll make sure that what goes on the website is a better quality.
Thank you. Councillor Fox.
If we're going to put it on the website, that's great, but I was thinking maybe we should put something in the Chronicle as well for people who aren't necessarily going to read the website.
Yeah, I don't want to raise expectations. This is a master plan at this stage. There is no funding attached to this, so I'd be very loath to put anything in the Chronicle, because then people assume that it's going to actually happen. This is a master plan that, yes, we have funded, but essentially that the Little Athletics Club and the Cricket Club have done together.
Put a swimming pool in there, Mayor.
In the middle. Just before I ask Councillor Dean to sum up, I just want to make a couple of comments. Certainly, I think this is a terrific vision for that area. We know that little athletics is such a growing sport, and I think that the Kingborough Little Athletics Club is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, little athletics club in the state. And one of the issues that they've had is the current oval doesn't allow them to, it's not a 400 metre track. So anyone taking part in the 400 metres has to do sort of like 1 1/4, I think, laps of the oval. And at the moment, they don't have sufficient lanes for the 100 metres. So because of the numbers that are coming through, so this plan also provides them with some additional lanes for the 100 metre track. And they've managed to fit all that on there, along with upgraded facilities for their field events, which are obviously just as important as their track events. And of course, we do have the ongoing issue of the lack of capacity for our cricketers. And we did certainly highlight both of these issues during the recent state election campaign. Unfortunately, certainly the Labor Party had supported this this proposal and said that they would provide funding for this. I think it is very important for both clubs, but particularly for the Kingborough Knights, to have a second turf wicket, because it's not acceptable that we have junior cricketers who are playing their home games in Brighton when their parents have to drive them all the way out there. So I hope that this is a catalyst for some future funding opportunities, whether that be state or federal. Certainly we are very mindful, as Councillor Cordova has pointed out, of both the additional impost on our turf maintenance budget, but also on our balance sheet in terms of depreciation. But I can honestly say that for both of those things, that certainly it would be far less than Aquatic Centre would be in terms of the financial impost in the longer term for us. So very happy to endorse this, and I hope it does lead to people within other areas of government taking notice that this is something that the growing Kingborough community needs. Councillor Dean, did you want to sum up? No. All right, I'll put the recommendation as moved by Councillor Dean and seconded by Councillor Bain. All those in favour? Against? Motion is carried. We turn now to page 22, Financial Report for March 2024, with a recommendation on page 24. Looking for a mover and a seconder. Looks like I've got a mover in Councillor Bain and a seconder in Councillor Gladeright. Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mayor. So the financial report in front of us is at the 31st of March, 3/4 of the way through the financial year. The report tells us the Council's cash and investments amount to $5.3 million at the end of March, with final quarterly rate payments to occur in April and be added to the balance. On the flip side, Council currently has 13.9 million in borrowings, which of course we'd like to see reduce as further residential and commercial development occurs over at Kingston Park in the coming years. The forecast result for 23-24 is, as we know, not good, with a forecast underlying deficit of $2.2 million. Increased road maintenance costs of $620,000 make up part of this, along with lower numbers of planning applications and supplementary property rates. However, the major contributor is the depreciation shortfall of $1.6 million. So it's here where I'd like to ask a few questions, given this is the major part of it. So given the large impact depreciation and revaluations are having on both this year's budget and our draft 24-25 budget, just like to ask some questions in regards to the process that's in place to reach these figures. And I've got a couple which I've forwarded through already, but the questions are, just can we have a rundown on how often assets are revalued and the process involved, if external expertise is brought in for valuations, what checks and balances are in place to ensure we arrive at the correct figures. And
can we take the questions one by one?
Sure, yep.
Okay, what was the first one
again?
again?
So the first question is, how often are assets revalued?
Yep.
And the process involved if external expertise is brought in for valuations.
Mr. Spinks.
Thank you, Mayor. First thing I'll say is just to remind ourselves that we're talking about long life assets, so we certainly don't revalue short life assets. So the overriding requirement is that our asset valuations remain materially correct. So obviously prices rise all the time. So if we were to not revalue our assets, those valuations would increasingly become irrelevant, I suppose, and not provide full information. So in answer to the question, how often do we do them? A rule of thumb is typically sort of 3 to 5 years. If you're in a cycle of rapidly rising construction prices, you might have to sort of bring those and do those a little bit more regularly. In a cycle of moderate price increases, you might push them out to 5. But a rule of thumb is 3 to 5. In terms of the process, it's important to remember that whichever cycle we're on, whether that's 3 or 4 or 5 years, it's unlikely that in that period we're going to have a large sample size of capital works to use as a base for it to use our own costs of construction. So for something like that you might be doing regularly, so road sealing, might be an example of where you can use your own internal costs, your own tendered rates and those kinds of things. But more typically, you don't have a large sample size, so stormwater works and building works, even in the road space, so you might be doing reseals quite regularly, but underneath that surface, base and sub-base and these kinds of works you're doing on a much less frequent basis. So typically you will get some outside assistance to help you with your valuations. And they'll be suitably qualified individuals or firms who are familiar with market conditions and so forth. And that's certainly the process we use. So I think I've answered question number 1.
Second question?
Second question. So I guess after they're put in place, what checks and balances do we put in place to ensure that we've arrived at the correct figures? For example, do we have any external audit involvement? Yeah, so Mayor, I suppose that the first checks and balance is the utilisation of those qualified people to assist us with the valuations. During the course of a revaluation process, we'll be getting updates and sort of information fed through to us as the management team. So David and his team and myself and my team will sort of be reviewing that on the way through. In overall terms, though, of course, we have the audit panel in place. The audit panel has some outside expertise with financial management and other things, so they oversee this process. And ultimately, in the long run, we have our annual audit just done by the Tasmanian Audit Office. So, in local government, because infrastructure dominates our balance sheet and the depreciation charge is our second largest expense, I know that this is an area of real focus for the auditors, and I'm pleased to say that we haven't had any issues reported to us.
Next question.
Thank you. Third and last question. Once the revaluation's done, how often do we check the indexation that's been applied against that for the out years?
Mr. Spinks.
Yep, so in between revaluations of any given asset class, what we do in those intervening years is apply an annual index to increase the valuations. It's difficult to sort of obtain the perfect index, but what we do is use a combination of, and these all come from the ABS, the price indices. So one is the Building Construction Index for Australia, another one is the Building Construction Index for Tasmania, and the third one is the Road Construction Index for Australia, and we don't have a Tasmanian one because they don't produce one. So we use a combination of those indices, and then further to that we use a 3-year rolling average. So just sort of remove any particular peaks and troughs in any given year. So that's the indices that we use, and that's acceptable to the Audit Office.
Councillor Bain.
Thank you, that's all.
Further questions? Councillor Gladwright.
Thank you. Can you help me to understand, please, on page 43, I've just noticed there's a difference between a budget and an actual, which I don't understand. For the public open space, 121,000.
Yes, I think through you, Mayor, I think that the simple answer there is that public open space contributions we don't actually budget for,
right.
Just given the inherent difficulty of doing so. So we don't budget for that, and so that's why there's no budget.
Thank you.
Councillor Bain, did you have another question?
No.
Were your lights on? Councillor Dean. Oh, sorry, Councillor Antoli.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. My question is around 4.3 in the report, which is on page 24, the top of page 24 of my agenda. It says Council's cash and investments are blah, 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 which is a reduction. And it talks about the 4th instalment receipts will occur in April. So, correct me if I'm wrong, that is the payment made from the investment. Is that correct?
Sorry, Mayor, that's probably not the best wording. We're talking about the 4th rates instalment will be received at the end of April.
So we receive a rate instalment. Can you explain that?
Yep, so our rates notices go out and
beg your pardon.
People,
you're talking about the rates.
I think you're talking about instalments,
because you're talking about investments just before that, and I'm thinking in terms of receiving returns from the investment.
Yeah.
Apologies, Mayor. We could have worded that a little better, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, thank you. And you may answer the next question if I may continue. Borrowings of 13.9 million offset this amount. So again, you're referring to the rates from the community. Council will reborrow funds as they fall due. Can you explain what that means?
Mr. Spinks.
Yep, through you, Mayor. So as you know, Council has a number of borrowings at the moment. They were all subject to the state government interest-free period, and so they're all maturing. We don't have the capacity to be paying those off as they mature, so we will be reborrowing those as we talked about in the workshops.
Okay, it's almost like rolling it over to, yeah, I get the concept you're trying to say. Thank you for clarifying all that. Okay.
So from an interest-free loan to a, yeah. Councillor Dean.
Thanks.
And then Councillor Midgley.
Yeah, one question, a couple of questions. Around supplementary rates, it's saying that we're forecast $100,000 under. Just to be clear, supplementary rates, are they rates that we receive throughout the year when a subdivision occurs, an additional upgrade to a property happens, so then they have come into by a higher rate? So is it just down to the slowing building industry that our sub rates are down by so much?
Yeah, so what used to happen is that we used to underestimate that figure somewhat. So we were constantly in our budgets for quite a period of time. I think we only allowed for 0.5% supplementary rates. And so we were constantly seeing in all the budget reports that we were coming in over budget for that. And so quite a few years ago, Council asked our financial staff if we could increase that supplementary rates number so that we had a more realistic figure. We did that, and now we're seeing a slowing down in development applications, which is then having an impact on the number of additional rates that we receive in a financial year.
Thanks. I also had some questions that, to follow up on Councillor Bain, very similar questions, but I just wanted to be really clear, because you outlined the process, Mr Spinks, about what happens at council, but could I just have clarified, in terms of the stormwater evaluation, was that done by an external body, or was that done by us, or who did that stormwater evaluation?
Yes, Mr Reeve can help me out here, but yes, it was done externally. What I should add, whilst these evaluations may be done externally, at the end of the day, we always retain accountability. So we have to satisfy ourselves that the valuations have been done following an appropriate methodology and so on and so forth, and checks and balances. But to answer your question, yes, it was.
Mr Reeve, did you want to add anything? Well, Mr Spinks said you did.
Through you, Mayor. What a wonderful occasion.
Your enthusiasm tonight is just like, 2 out of 10.
Absolutely. That's correct. So
Not doing a great, service in front of the new CEO, by the way.
It's okay. We're all different. So that's correct. So we will go out externally there, but one of the things we always do is we'll get, obviously, their cut of figures back, and the first thing we will do with that is actually look at that and actually also ground truth that a little bit ourselves. So as much as we may not have a lot of works there that we can actually rely on, that we do have some that we can actually look at and actually say, well, the market's actually saying this, is that in concurrence with what they're actually saying as well at the same time. So there's a lot of interaction between us and the private estimator there to make sure that what we actually put on the table in the end is actually reflective of the current conditions of the time. So it's not just, there's a report, take it and leave it. There's a lot of toing and froing between council staff and the estimator to make sure it is as right as we possibly can get it.
Councillor Dean.
I guess a follow-up then is, if we've worked with an external consultant and, stormwater evaluation has gone from, 1.3 million forecast next year out to 2.3, so it's clearly a significant number. Did we at any point consider that maybe we should just get a second opinion, just given how much this impacts our budget going forward? And I guess the point that you've probably already kind of touched on there a bit is that we're assessing market conditions, and we know that building construction have gone through the roof. We also know, as councillors coming before us, tenders usually only have, well, in the time I've been on council, very small number, and so we're not having a full, I guess, perfect market to assess tenders and things, and that's what we're assessing right here. So was there any thought to maybe just check those numbers with a second opinion, I guess is my question.
Mr Reeve.
Yes, we can do on occasions, and we have done that with other revals. And this occasion there, we looked at that and I guess checked against some of the other figures we knew. So we already had some tenders that had come back for stormwater there, and we'd seen the large increases, anything from 30 to 50% in a very short period of time for stormwater projects there, based on what we had in our estimates as compared to what the tender prices came at. So we knew that stormwater in particular had gone up quite a lot. So we were expecting there to be some large increases in the valuations for stormwater. So it wasn't untoward. It wasn't something that would have actually driven us to actually say, look, I think we need to get a second or a third opinion on that. What we did do is certainly go through each of the individual rates for each of the stormwater ones and say, okay, let's check each of those ones there and do a bit of a sanity check on some of those ones, which we did, and made some adjustments, or suggest some adjustments with the consultant. So that process all occurred as part of it. I don't think there would have been the value of going to another estimator to actually provide information back, which would have been probably very similar to what we actually expected. But we will do it on occasions where we think, hang on, that doesn't actually quite gel with us. That's not what the market's actually been telling us. That's not what other councils actually have if they've done recent revals as well at the same time. Or there's something there that actually doesn't seem to be quite right. So we have done that in the past. In this case, that wasn't the case with stormwater.
Councillor Dean.
Yeah, look, I find it a really interesting one, and I probably, as I've alerted to the Director of Finance, would really like to flesh this one out a lot more, because it is such a big impost on our budget. And I guess a follow-up question is just, the report also notes that we're currently in the process of reclassifying open space and building asset classes, which have gone up substantially in the forward budget, although we haven't actually done that revaluation. So my question is, are we making similar assumptions about those asset classes, that we are now predicting significant increases once again, without actually at this point seeing? So I feel like we were here 12 months ago. We didn't have the figures in front of us. We clearly underestimated by a country mile. So I'd just like to know where we are at in terms of those two asset classes moving forward.
Mr. Spinks.
Through you, Mayor. So, as Councillor Dean has pointed out, we're revaluing the open space class and the buildings classes at the moment. Both of those classes are smaller in terms of asset value, in terms of than stormwater. We've already got some indicative results for both of them, so we're well progressed through the process. So I don't think we're going to have any repeats of last year in terms of finalising it sort of well after sort of budget time. Those early results indicate something in the order of an increase for buildings in depreciation. This is around about $100,000. For open space, I think it's $300,000. So we've factored those into the forecast that you see in front of you, and also into the draft budget for next year for those two classes.
Councillor Dean.
Just a follow-up question as around depreciation. Another point that's made on page 23 is around the estimated impact of the capitalisation of completed works currently classified as work in progress. This issue will also impact 24-25. Could you just speak to that a little bit? Because I'm struggling to understand how we had a long-term financial plan last year that looked specifically at, we knew a bunch of projects were coming online, but that's making a significant impact on next year's budget. So is there any way that you could just kind of tease out how that is an impact right now in terms of the capitalisation of projects that we're currently doing, which we knew, playground at Kingston Park, for example, was one we knew was well in the cards a long time ago, how that plays out in the budget at the moment?
Mr. Spinks.
Yep, through you, Mayor. So we have talked about this at the workshop, but in essence, when capital works are complete, physically complete, they also need to be finalised in terms of the paperwork, if I can call it that. And part of that involves finalising the project in our systems and transferring those projects into our asset systems proper, so that they can start to be depreciated. Now, we have built up over a period of time now a very large balance in the capital work in progress account. So there's quite a backlog of assets that need to be transferred into our asset management systems and start to be depreciated. Once again, we've made an estimate of the impact of those. We think, and I stress it's an estimate, we think that the depreciation impact could be in the order of $1 million. So we're picking up the entirety of the Kingston Park project plus a range of other capital works that we've done over recent times. We're working through that process as we speak. That $1 million, we think we'll get through some of that. So we've put about $500,000 into the forecast for this year, and the remaining $500,000 to be picked up in next year's budget as well. But it's fair to say that we do have a backlog of capital works in progress that needs to be capitalised, and there is a very clear depreciation impact of those assets.
Councillor Dean.
So I guess a question on that backlog, is that just a confluence of timing that all these projects are coming online at this minute, or have we just for some reason not been processing that over to that system that you've just spoken about in recent years?
Mr. Spinks.
Look, I'm probably not the best person to ask for that question in terms of it's mainly fairly new, but look, I think it's a combination of a variety of things. Resources in our respective teams are probably not where they need to be, combined with the fact that we've had a very large spike in our works program over recent years, and most obviously that's Kingston Park. So I think it's just a convergence of events that have led to that balance building up. It is a matter that's been alerted to us a couple of years ago now by the auditors. That they certainly noted this and noted the fact that depreciation was being understated as a result. So David's team and my team are working very hard at the moment to address the situation.
Councillor Dean.
Look, I'm just going to finish by saying I'll obviously be supporting the report, but I am very appreciative of the fact that there will be an additional workshop if people listening at home in the back of the agenda is an additional workshop to look at the budget, and I think there's a lot of issues like this one is a fairly complex one, and I think it would be great for us to really look into it, because I find it really hard to grapple with the idea that just the point you've made that we've been building up a backlog of capital works projects that for some reason 12 months ago we didn't have before us and didn't factor into our long-term depreciation. Yeah, I look forward to looking at that more detail in the workshop and listening to the community feedback and hopefully, yeah, getting to, as the Mayor pointed out earlier this evening, which feels like a long time ago, that no stone will be unturned. Thanks.
Does indeed. Thank you. Any further discussions? Just before I ask Councillor Bain if he wants to sum up, I will just make the point again, as I did earlier, and that is that we present every month comprehensive information to the community in the form of this set of accounts. It has every line item, every department, it has an explanation, it has graphs, it has tables, and that is why I took great offence at any suggestion that was made earlier this evening that we are not being transparent and open and accountable to our community with our financial situation, because anybody who's been reading this or listening to council meetings will have heard discussion, particularly in recent months, around the projections that we were seeing in terms of an underlying deficit. I just want to debunk that myth again, that we are hiding our books or anything like that. That is certainly not the case. And I still hold by the fact that we do need to operate like a business in terms of we need to be financially viable. But you also don't find businesses opening up their books to this extent as councils are required to do. Councillor Bain, did you want to sum up?
Thank you, Mayor. Just briefly, thank you to the contributions and thank you to the responses from the council officers. I think it was a good summary of just the issue that we have is our existing assets have gone up in price, and to renew and replace those, we're going to need additional revenue. It's not that we need additional revenue to go out and buy some new things, it's just to look after the ones that we've already got and replace them when the time comes. So, yes, good discussion.
Thank you very much. I'm going to put the recommendation now as moved by Councillor Bain, seconded by Councillor Gladwright. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Motion is carried unanimously. Takes us to page 85, appendices with a recommendation on the same page. I'm looking for a mover and a seconder. I've got a mover in Councillor Midgley, seconder in Councillor Fox. Councillor Midgley, any questions?
Thank you, Mayor. Just to note that they are, the appendix with all of the works information or the projects that have been completed across Kingborough, the infrastructure works report, that's the one, really just shows, again, what we've just talked about, the amount of things, building that is happening across the municipality, and then for community to just see the breadth of works that happens across the whole municipality, from, Taroona to Kingston to Bruny Island to Gordon. So I think that's a really important thing that we, it's good to showcase this one to the community. And if you're listening, have a look at this great works that is there. And I guess it understands some of that financial discussions that we're having and that long-term picture of what we need to maintain and replace if needed. I just had a question around the snug toilet block when that first came up, and I know community really advocated for that as well. The community advocated for an outdoor shower with the increase of swimming. I'm just wondering, is there an outdoor shower included?
Yes, there is an outdoor shower.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Antoli.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to reiterate what Councillor Midgley just said. I was amazed at the amount of infrastructure work going on. There were things happening down the road from where I live that I knew nothing about. So thank you very much for informing me about my own backyard. And I would like to just reiterate that fact that we don't look. Everyone loves to complain. It's so easy to complain. It's a lot harder to explain. And I think personally, this council needs to be doing better at explaining. I think we don't feel that we need to spend too much time doing that, because we would think that maybe what we do is self-evident, but for some people, even like myself, it's not always self-evident with works down the road. So I would like to encourage our new CEO to maybe think about how it is that we can be better at explaining. For example, we know that we have a deficit this year and a deficit next year, but do people know that the years after that it's not so deficit, that it's actually a J-curve, not a precipitous cliff? Maybe we should be better at explaining what the long-term forecast is. Yes, a bit of pain right now with a bit of rate increase now, but if we don't do it, we won't get years 3, 4, 5 and 6. And I think we need to be better at explaining those, because they're actually quite rosy. And people need to hear that there is actually hope out there, not this... there are people out in the community that think that we're only doing 12% annual rate increases forever. It is not true. There's a huge drop in year 3, and maybe we could be a bit more explaining of that, so that people understand that this is well-considered changes for a long-term benefit that our children and ourselves will enjoy as a result of that. So 2 years, a bit of an increase, and then 3 and 4 is looking much, much rosier, and then budget surpluses, which is fantastic. So suggestion and an observation.
Thank you, Councillor Antoli. Any further discussion? Councillor Dean.
Yeah, look, I've got a question, and I'm happy if this question needs to be moved into closed session, just because it relates to the tender, I suppose, at Browns Road, but maybe it's fine, I'm not sure.
No, if it's anything to do with tender, it'll have to go into closed session.
It's more about the traffic management of the Brown Road reconstruction program. We have to take that on now, or should we move that over?
We can take that now.
So, look, my understanding is that, as it says here, Council's still waiting on advice and approval from DSG for the temporary on-ramp to facilitate and reduce traffic disruption first side, etc. Is it correct that they've just rejected our request for an on-ramp? And if they've rejected it, then this is a significant project that we've invested a lot of money in. Like, what is the alternative on this one?
Mr. Reeve.
Through you, Mayor, no, it's not correct that they've actually rejected it. We had an independent traffic consultant have a look at it there and provide some recommendations back to DSG. They've queried that. We're still in discussions with DSG, so it's not factually correct. They've actually rejected that. In terms of what that might mean, if, for example, they turned around and said, look, no, we don't want to have a temporary off-ramp in that area there, there is other options. It just creates a little bit more disruption. We'll be looking at other alternative routes such as Proctor's Road and so forth, which is not ideal, but it's still certainly possible to continue with the project. It just creates more disruption by not actually having this option in place there. So we will continue to have those discussions with State Growth. So we've got a little bit of time up our sleeve, because the contractor doing the works will be doing another project for us first. So there is a little bit of time.
Councillor Dean.
Look, I'm glad to hear that it's not actually holding the project up, because I have a very strong understanding that it was actually late last year before Christmas that we were given a strong letter that said we do not accept the on-ramp, and suggested that we go via Proctor's Road, which, as you've said, isn't ideal. So I might have to take that one offline, because it's in stark contradiction with what you're saying. So it'd be interesting to find out what's going on there. But I'm glad that it isn't being currently held up.
Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a very quick one. I think every meeting that the Infrastructure Works report comes to, everyone says what a very informative report it is. Just wondering if we could consider maybe cutting it out as a standalone report, putting it on the front page of our website, linking to our social media so more people come across it.
Thank you. Yeah, I do know that we do highlight and have been some of these projects within our social media, and I know from our communications manager that lately we've been picking themes of some of the work that we do, for example, tracks and trails and playground upgrades and that sort of thing. We've been highlighting those on our social media, but certainly I do agree with the comments that this is really significant work that we're doing that perhaps people aren't aware of the sorts of things and the extent of what we do, and it would be great to get this message out, particularly in the climate in which we're currently in of discussing a rate increase. It's important that the community understand the services that we do provide. For example, I'm pretty sure that most people don't give a thought about who has responsibility for street lighting. Guess what? We do. 1,800 streetlights across Kingborough. I'm pretty sure not a lot of people would know that if you said, does council have responsibility and pay for street lighting? So, yes, I agree that we could probably make this more prominent, and I'm sure that our staff who are listening to this will take note of that. Thank you. Any further discussion? Councillor Midgley.
Thank you. Just one more question in regards to, it's related to graffiti and I guess blank spaces. When I think about the toilet blocks and the blank spaces, and unfortunately Taroona, what's happened there, have we ever sort of thought about as part of our capital works to how we conclude like public art, urban art kind of projects as part of that? And have we ever sort of considered putting any money aside as part of those kind of developments to perhaps deter graffiti type things with urban art walls?
It is certainly part of the conversation that I started having last week. The issue with murals and public art is they don't come cheap. If you look at the one that they're doing at Blackmans Bay Primary School, they've been crowdfunding to do that because they've got some grey Besser brick walls, and that project is $20,000. So if you consider that a toilet block is maybe half that size, you're looking at $10,000 to $15,000 on top of the cost of building the facilities in order to in order to try and hope then that art is not then overtaken by graffiti, because depending on what the art is, there's still a propensity for people to graffiti over the top of it. And you may be aware of the building near the wetlands that has got the nice Tasmanian tiger on it. I think that only lasted a few weeks and it was graffitied over and we had to pay to get it redone again. That comes with some challenges as well. But I do think there are areas, particularly where there are large blank walls, that it'd be good to get some murals, not murals. It's getting late. Murals on there, and I'd certainly encourage private property owners, commercial property owners, to consider that as well. Any further discussions, Councillor Dean?
Yeah, just look while that discussion's come up. I've lived in places where there are public art walls where it's been given over to graffiti artists to use, and it actually works really successfully because artists use it, they know that it's going to get taken, someone will come and draw over it or paint over it in a day, in a week, but it's something for them to provide for their own marketing. They're obviously very talented and it gives them a space. So I think if we could just throw in the mix there that it's not just a mural that someone pays $20,000 to do, but if you've got a few Besser blocks underneath the basketball hoop, you can turn it into a public graffiti wall, and that will encourage local artists to actually use it in a productive way.
Yep, thank you. Further discussions? If not, Councillor Midgley, you don't want to close the debate, do you? No. Okay, I'll put the recommendation now. Moved by Councillor Midgley, seconded by Councillor Fox. All those in favour? Against? Motion is carried. We are now on page 85. Notices of motion. There were no notices of motion. Still on page 85, we've got confirmation of items to be dealt with in closed session, which is confirmation of minutes, applications for leave of absence and tender assessment AB 2304, Whitewater Creek, Summerleys Road pedestrian underpass. Looking for a mover and a seconder. I've got a mover in Councillor Fox and a seconder in Councillor Bain. All those in favour? Against? Motion is carried. Thank you very much to everyone who has been watching along at home this evening in accordance with Kingborough Council's meetings audio recordings guidelines policy. Recording of the open session of the meeting will now cease. So open session of council adjourns at 7:52 p.m. and good evening and thank you to everyone.